We really just can't seem to help ourselves. As soon as one college basketball season is over, we start speculating about the next one. There's no off season. The biggest question on everybody's minds: who's declaring for the NBA draft? Who's testing the waters? And who's actually coming back to school? Well, guess what, friends? That's exactly why I'm here, to answer those questions for you.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start just the preliminary looks at Carolina's basketball roster and start projecting who we think will stay, who we think will go, who we think will test the waters, who we think will transfer, all of that stuff. And before I even get into it, let me say I'm not basing this on any of my insider information. This is just all totally what I think is going to happen as of when we're recording this show. And stuff starts coming out all the time, especially just right in the wake of the end of the season. And so who knows, we might start getting information really quickly. There's also some recruiting information on the horizon. We're going to talk about that early in next week, unless it already happens before then, in which case we'll do some kind of emergency pod to get you up to date. Well, first off, I want to talk about people on the roster that I think are automatically out. Well, one definitely is automatically out, and that, unfortunately, is Brady Manek. He has exhausted the very last of his eligibility and will no longer be able to play in college. So, Brady Manek is off to bigger and better things, and cannot wait to see what that is. I hope he's been able to parlay just this incredible season into a great pro career. That's not only great for him, that's great for the Carolina program, right? Come here, blow up on the biggest stage, and translate that into the next level. That's great for the program. That's great for Brady Manek. The other person I think is definitely out, drum roll, you can probably guess though, and you don't need a drum roll, is Dawson Garcia. I just don't see him coming back. I do think there's more there than meets the eye. Yes, absolutely. The family health is a huge part of the conversation, but I think there's more there, and maybe we'll find that out one day. Okay, I've got a list of 5 of the players that I think are returning. I'll give each one a little percent of what I think it is. Here's the 5 in no particular order. Puff Johnson. I'm putting his at 100%. I think Puff Johnson knows he's going to be an integral part of this team. I think he knows that he has a role. I think he knows how much Coach Hubert Davis loves him. Puff Johnson will be back in Chapel Hill next season. Same with Dontrez Styles. I think there was some speculation throughout the season that perhaps he wouldn't return. But if you've heard quotes and things from him, this dude's locked in. I'm giving him a 100% return too. Next up is RJ Davis. I think RJ Davis will ultimately test the draft waters, because why wouldn't you, right? It just makes sense. I know that used to be a scary thing, but now with the way they've laid things out between the NCAA and the NBA, it just makes sense for anyone who has any remote idea of playing in the league to test the waters. And so I think RJ Davis tests the waters and ultimately comes back. Just a lot of that based on his frame. But man, his game is phenomenal, and I think he's going to get a shot professionally, but I think it would behoove him to just run the team another year. So I'm going to put it back at 90% that RJ Davis is in Chapel Hill next year. So that's 3. Number 4, Justin McCoy. I know he didn't get a ton of playing time this season. That injury set him back and never really cracked back fully into the rotation after that. However, he essentially was the 8th man throughout the postseason and the end of the regular season, as Kerwin Walton was essentially confined to the bench, as was DeMarco Dunn. Those 3 of Styles, Puff Johnson, and McCoy were the 3 that were getting minutes. And so because of how much Hubert Davis values defense and because of McCoy's background with defense and playing for Virginia, I think he stays around. I'm going to put it at 80% that McCoy is back in Chapel Hill. And my final person that I'm going to project back is Anthony Harris. And here's why. I know he's been out the rest of this season, and we've never really fully gotten an answer why that is, and yet he's been around. I didn't get a chance to talk with him on Monday night before the championship game. He was on the phone. I had walked over to just ask him a couple questions, but he was on the phone. I didn't want to bother him. But that in itself, Anthony Harris is there and still involved. That to me says, I'm not playing with the team this year, but I'm also not leaving. That is itself enough to tell me he's coming back. And he's got this defense and this athleticism that allows him to be part of having a role on this team. He had a role on this team before he was out. To me, if he was going to transfer, he'd be gone already. There's no reason to stick around North Carolina. So for me, Anthony Harris is that fifth one who's coming back. Now, the next category of player, we've already locked 5 in, is the transfer watch. And I've got 2 players in this category of players I'm again, no insider information, just based on role and playing time and other things that I'm concerned might transfer out. Number 1 is Kerwin Walton. Love Kerwin Walton. Great dude, passionate, works hard, has a great shot, but has his struggles defensively. And just because of Coach Davis's emphasis on the defensive side of the ball, I wouldn't be surprised if Kerwin at the very least considers it and maybe even transfers out. The other is DeMarco Dunn. Reason being, if Anthony Harris does indeed come back, if RJ Davis comes back, we haven't talked about Caleb Love yet, but if he's back, not to mention the freshman coming in, is there a role? Is there a spot for Dunn? I'm not so sure, unfortunately. So, to me, we've got these 2 guys in the transfer watch, and I would say at least one of the 2, potentially even both, is not a Tar Heel next season. Obviously, more is going to come out of about all of this as we go. These are just my early reactions and thoughts to it. The 2 big question marks on the roster in terms of who could return or not return are Caleb Love and Armando Bacot. I feel like they're in decently similar positions, although I think Caleb Love is the more NBA ready. Neither really, though, of these 2 are showing up in mock drafts. Caleb Love is getting a little more, forgive me, love now because of his NCAA tournament performance, and we know how NBA franchises are suckers for NCAA tournament performances. And so I wouldn't be surprised if his stock is at something of an all-time high right now. But neither of these guys are surefire first-round picks. You never know, right? Think back to Cam Johnson, who might sneak in and want to grab somebody, but they both obviously should and will test the NBA waters. And at the end of the day, my thought is that Caleb Love stays in the draft and that Armando Bacot comes back to Chapel Hill. Ultimately, it's all about NIL money, and that is something that helps in this day and age. If a player who might have turned pro even a year ago might now decide to come back because he can make more money in college than he could as a pro. We're going to talk infinitely more about NIL during the offseason because I think it plays a huge role in continuity in college basketball, particularly. But for now, just suffice it to say, my gut, where I'm going with this, is that Caleb Love is not back and that Armando Bacot is. Now, there's someone very important that you notice I've left out, and that is none other than Leaky Black. Leaky Black is a senior this year, but as you may or may not know, every spring athlete was granted a extra year because of COVID in terms of eligibility. Now, this season, 21-22, those players could be on a team and not count against a team's scholarship math. However, I've reached out to several coaches around the country, and one thing they all told me is that they received news information from the NCAA that starting next year, players could still utilize that COVID year, but those players would now start counting against the scholarship math. A team can have 13 total scholarships. So Leaky Black can absolutely come back, but he would be one of the 13 scholarships. And so that's just something to keep in mind with all of that. He's hinted all along with not saying words that he's coming back. And so my thought is that unless just something has drastically changed because of the NCAA tournament run, that Leaky Black is back in Chapel Hill next year. I legitimately think that could happen. He could become the best defensive player in the country. I think he's right there already. It's just people haven't really recognized it until this NCAA tournament run and all its exposure. So I'm going to say Leaky Black is a Tar Heel in 2022-23. So with all of this, we're trying to speculate what is it that a young man values and cares about? Is it the college experience? Is it NIL money? Is it the relationships he's forming? Is it basketball growth? Is it moving on as soon as possible? As soon as you sniff an opportunity to get drafted, you're gone. Who knows what a young man's intentions are until you've had those conversations. So that's why it's dangerous when we speculate, and so I recognize that we do today. But that's where we're sitting. That's what we're trying to figure out. So those are all my speculations for who will be back, who's going to leave, and who might be somewhere in the middle, in between. And right now, a big question is who all actually can stay in terms of scholarship math, because we've got, don't forget, there are 4 incoming freshmen, potentially more with the Gigi Jackson announcement forthcoming and the possibility that he might reclass into the 2022 class as well. So all of that has to be considered, and you might be trying to figure out the scholarship math on the fly right now. Never fear, my friend. I'm going to unpack that next week. I love looking at the scholarship math and what you got to do to make it work. I'll show you a graph that I make. It'll be wonderful. Do not worry. That's coming up early next week. And remember, it really is a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace!